Yep.
And we are recording.
Sweet.
Cool. So I guess we're going to try pick up where we left off, talking about that other diagram from last session and segueing.
So we never brought up the diagram, the what I've been calling the flower thing. We never brought that up in the last meeting. We never got to it. In fact, it wasn't even made yet.
Right?
Um, so it was started but not finished. But it is something that I would want to focus on if we could, simply because it's excellent. Let's see here. Clicking all over the place here. So, oh, you disable screen sharing.
Uh, do, 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 do. Yeah, hold on. Is it or who can share?
It says
Okay.
host. It says host disable screen sharing to me. Oh, there we go. It's working. Okay,
Cool.
we're definitely not gonna show my Telegram window because that's just not rated PG.
No.
With the latest developments, nice
Might see
guys.
a certain part of Adam.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I kind of appreciate it.
No, yeah, I bet.
No, no, like I mean, uh, in a way, he's right. Like the subject matter needs to be discussed, and I'm all for that. I'm not sure about the execution. Frankly, that's not my problem.
Yep.
All right, you can see my screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here we go.
So how does this link in with the previous diagram?
The previous diagram. All right, so the previous diagram needs a slight augmentation. I'm just going to make a note on that. So this is that. We're talking about this one. The
Mm-hmm.
augmentation being is that the narrative bubble itself. Is it the narrative or the spectacle? Yeah, the spectacle bubble itself is actually encompassing both this narrative bubble currently and the space bubble. So the spectacle would encompass both.
Right.
That's not shown properly here.
Gotcha.
So that what that would do is it would separate the concepts of narratives from the concept of the spectacle as its own thing, and that has to do with the spectacle having modes, which is a different subject altogether. But if you recall, modes being narrative, cosmological, and phenomenological, and so for the spectacle to be able to do all of those things, it's not the same thing as being a narrative in and of
Mm-hmm.
itself. So that's kind of where that comes from. The two modes would be represented here as the two separate bubbles of narrative and space, and the all-encompassing then bubble would be the phenomenal bubble, which is what we're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, a lot of that probably went over the heads of everybody else.
Yeah, it's fine. So
Um,
spectacle being, we're talking about like codependent phenomena. You don't have a narrative without space and all this kind of stuff.
yeah, exactly. So it's all like it's just not abstracting it correctly, and what is being said is not consistent with what is being shown. So we need to fix that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So how
Um,
do we move from that
so this is the old diagram,
to the
and we're
archetypes?
moving. Yeah, so we're moving away. So if you will, why I'll mention all of these fixings and whatnot is because the previous conversation literally, not literally, primarily, I mean, to say, focused in and around the mode of narrative within the spectacle. And so
Mm-hmm.
we're moving on to the mode of cosmos in within the spectacle. So we're still in the same concrete layer kind of stuff, except now we're seeing how abstractions
Right.
play into
So
forming
within
narratives.
Yeah, within the narrative, we're allowing the
Narrative is
content
about chaining.
content of the structure to contain the form, and you go up in layer in abstraction.
Well, you go down in abstraction, you go up in being concrete, and then you kind of sort of weave all of the
Yeah,
concrete
no, I
things you've
wasn't.
got together into like this pattern, right? And
You know
this
what I
weave,
mean.
yeah. So here we're stepping back and going to instead of saying, okay, these are things that we're going to weave together and how that what does weaving looks like. Here we're more looking like, okay, well, what are the constituents of what will be weaving in the first place? Um, the sort of the set of, lack of a better word, universals. They're not the kind of universals that are like, hey, you absolutely everybody must feel this way kind of a deal. But it's something that captures um, that aspect that can pertain to anybody. A certain way of expressing it, basically.
Yep.
So
Still there?
yeah, sorry, I had to get distracted for a second. Um, okay, so that's that. So the whole idea is to sort of show how all of these things are really containing all of these other things. So it's not like one system is at literally sitting as in a layer above the other, but rather each layer looks at has all the other layers within it, so to speak, and it just
Mm-hmm.
references them in a different way. So that's the relationship between the two diagrams, and that's what we're going to be seeing as an as as, uh, as a end result of that. Okay, actually, this needs to be augmented with yet another picture from the archetype table, but we'll get there. Um, so the main thing to note right away, right? So we have these circles, lots and lots and lots and lots of circles. What the hell are these circles, and why are they even there? What's going on? Um, so these circles represent the primordial archetypes um, and their variations. So what does that mean? um, Soon we're going to augment this with another picture with a table on it to sort of show us what they are. But for the purposes of this diagram, we don't really care what they are, just what level they appear on, right? So we're denoting the fact that there's 12. That's just to indicate that they're there. There's nothing particularly special about that.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not ordering them in any way, and we're also not focusing in their hierarchy. Right, so this is not a matter of looking at them in a hierarchical fashion or anything like that. It's just to demonstrate that they're there and their distance from the center, if you will. So that's really what it's all about. And then there's a kind of like the idea behind this is that this diagram is moving from the center out. Okay, that's the gist of how it looks, but there's a caveat there. And we're going to look at the way it does that by looking at some of these wonderful confusing arrows.
So how do you go from the previous, which is um, like just this kind of the neural OS or whatever the mechanism of perception mechanism, the areas of perception. How do you go from that into primordial archetypes, which are taking care of different parts of any so-called existing thing, a thing in existence?
So that would be basically a different representation of this circle we're looking at right now called the cosmos or the abstract phase space. That's so The way you would see this is okay. If you recall, we have a meme plex, right? And a meme plex is basically this amorphous blob of memes that's actually doing all the action. And above that, we have the other two layers sort of doing all these focusing. So the APS and the spectacle being
This
those things.
this almost makes me want to pull up just the layers of the neural OS, so you can kind of connect the
Yeah,
APS
it's yeah, the diagram is definitely part of
with
that.
with things in existence, with physicality, right?
Yes, so hold on, let me see. Okay, so this doesn't interfere with that. I might have to do some picture download in here before we get going to facilitate that discussion. Okay, so let me just download that, save it as archetypes. Looks like I got yes, and then neural OS layers. You say? Let me just find that. Sorry. I will get there eventually. Okay, well, I think this picture is actually really good.
Which one?
The one that has the parallel and the mirrors on it. So I'm just going to be bouncing around
Sure.
between that one, this one, the one we're looking at, and this is becoming far more complicated than I thought it would.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to make logical jumps, I guess, right?
Yeah, no, we're definitely trying to say that this is all connected. We're not trying to make a convoluted thing worse than it actually is. So if we can bear that in mind, it's not exactly an easy thing to do. Um, where do I stop sharing? There it is. So, okay, so we're talking about Neural OS. For that, I'll open the image and link you to it. Apparently, it doesn't refresh the screens that you have available to you if you open a new window. Okay, so can you see this?
Yeah.
All right. Um, so the discussion is centering around the mimetic, abstract, and concrete layers.
Hmm.
And in particular about the fact that the concrete layer will represent the entire triad as in three different modes, one being the narrative, one being the cosmos, one being phenomena. And
Hmm.
all of that is what you get beyond the horizon over there in the shared layer. This is where you get the mirroring effect between the concrete and the shared. Um, and why it all is connected. Okay, so we were in our last discussion, we were talking about the concrete layer looking at itself as the concrete layer, which is essentially, that is to say, the narrative. And the narrative is characterized by its sequentiality. This, then
Right.
that, then this, then that, and you can't really pull apart the sequence. It's got this causal quality to it. Um,
Yeah.
and so in the last discussion, we were basically discussing the chain, what drives the chain forward, and what makes up the links of the chain. right now we're discussing the links of the chain and the materials, if you will, out of which they are built. And if that makes
Right.
some sort of analogous sense. And so that's where we get into the other picture. Let me just pull that up for you. Can you see that?
No, it's still sharing the photos.
Share screen. How about that?
Yeah.
All right. And so what the material, the raw material out of which each of these little boxes, square boxes, actually, let me refer to them first and then we'll continue. The material which is found, so in the abstract face space. So those square boxes that we see that are sort of like amorphous there, like they don't look differentiated from one another. They're just sort of,
Right.
they're sort of statically sitting there, and so like they're not like they're not just like out of nowhere, you know, like they're not going to be made out of like pure theory, right? Like they're not. What's the word I'm looking for here? They're not arbitrary. That's what I'm trying to say. So, and the reason they wouldn't be arbitrary is because we're talking about a biological being, right? We're talking about, again, um, growing a neural network that is learning, that is existing over time, and has context. It
Right.
has, it reads and sorry, I do get interrupted once in a
Yeah.
while here. So it's if I go silent, just know that I'm still here. Um, So yeah, we're not we're looking at the fact that they're not primarily built out of nothing, and what is that thing and why it's relevant. We're going to be looking at that basically. That's what we're discussing in this layer, and that all of that is captured via this diagram here, or at least the parts that would be relevant to why would be discussing this in the first place. Right? That's kind of where the idea is coming from. And
Okay.
so, what are those building blocks? Well, this is where we have what you would call the primordial archetypes. So the primordial archetypes are, for lack of a better analogy, it's like the sum bonum of all but the potential shapes the memeplex could be classified into.
Hmm.
Right? Like how it would self-reference.
Yeah, and these things
Okay.
are going to happen just by the fact of being a body moving through space and time, that you're
Yeah.
going to encounter things like uncertainty because you think it's one way and it turns out it's continually not that way.
Yeah, so and in particular, so you'll notice that the phrasing here is actually kind of odd for saying for saying oh this is the term as it goes by, and there's a reason for that because they're meant to represent a reflection of the outer world. They're not meant to differentiate the inner world from the outer world, but rather to demonstrate it as a kind of a mix of something that gets strung together in this and the like the previous narrative diagram and the previous uh, cosmos in that diagram and all of that stuff, right? So
Mm.
that's how it's all tied together. um, and these some of them are kind of seem really awkward because and especially when you go up the diagram, you got fiat, corp, and state, which kind of seem a little bit cyberpunk driven, so to speak. You have a very technocratic sort of image going on with that, sort of matrixy with the machine, especially underneath that. So yeah, and it's all kind of like pointing and it's all kind of like touching on all of these different aspects that get strung together into narratives, right?
Hmm.
And so the way to look at it is in terms of potential, and we've been throwing the word around pure potential. So this is what that's in reference to, in that regardless of which frame of the narrative you're in, which little box in the chain are in the links, you your potential is built out of these constituents, and these constituents always point to these very same potential recycling itself. And so the potential itself remains essentially pure in terms of these archetypes, right? And so to make it actually useful, instead of just a bunch of words in the air, you would have to identify something that encompasses at least the building blocks of what you would call the universal narrative, right? What is it about? And like, this is kind of where you get a lot of parallels with mythology and just like the hero's journey and all of that stuff.
Hmm.
Simply because it's all it all originates from the same kind of experiences of growing up and coming together with a society, just sort of merging an individual into a greater whole. It's to some extent what that process looks like, and a lot of it has to do with the shaping of this of the names of these archetypes. In particular, you would see there's a word state, but it's kind of it's the kind of state that you would think it is, as in like a sovereign state or whatever. But it's also a bit of a play on words, in the sense that it's the state of things. Like, it's this way but not that way. Um, it's a binary sort of indicator of how things are, and and if you look a little bit further into duality over there, it's at the cusp of what's called order, right? It's again getting into binaries, yes versus no, black versus white. You don't really have middle ground in that little box, and the rest of it is like, well, how do we get there from a completely uncertain state where we don't really know what's next, aside from potential.
Right. Yeah, and that's the
So
whole chaos order
yeah,
dichotomy.
that's exactly what that's for. It's also indicating that dichotomy itself is actually more of a spectrum,
Hmm.
and in particular that they are highly codependent, interlinked. And if you look at the elemental column, they're also um, the basic mechanism in and of itself of things consolidating through decay, um, moving over time because of that. Like,
Hmm.
decay acts as fuel. Fuel acts as a way to consolidate things and bring them together, and that all
Right.
takes and that takes between and what that does is it takes the static state of affairs in space and completely makes them chaotic, through time.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's like the ideal form versus the substance.
Yeah. So the as you can see, basically the left side of the diagram is more is about more like the mechanics of it, and sort of how to look at it in terms of dynamics. Um, the unity column is to draw the attention to the fact that regardless of the potential being as it is, you still can't really use that to know, like, to do things like predict, quote unquote, the future, right? It's not all it does is shows you how probabilities will work themselves out, but not, it's not going to tell you like, you know, you have this, therefore tomorrow you'll have that. It's more about seeing what can get built and why it would.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, like you're saying with the myth being comparable with what other systems would put forward as this is like kind of our cosmos or explanation of the most fundamental types of things that you'll see as a being existing in the universe.
I said right and what it means, except I muted at the wrong time. Okay,
So
so
did we link up the previous diagram sufficiently to this? You were saying, so you're pointing at cosmos, right? Is that, and these as types? Is that what you're
the
saying?
they're not types, they're archetypes.
That's, yeah, that's what I mean. Like, but you were
So
pointing at types.
archetypes are like the something below types, if you will. They're going to be how you'll get a type, right? It's the memes. So in meme world, it's more mechanical, and so they don't know what the types will be. They'll just assemble them out of what types they get through signaling and all of that stuff.
Hmm.
So it's going to be a matter of what artifacts do we have and how do we stitch them together, which will give us our memes. The memes then interact and say, oh, okay, like we're building this cosmology, right? That's the gist of this part here, where you get the decay.
Right.
Right, so this is meta narrative. It's sort of like the memeplex would be like the code, the matrix code behind this, and this would be like the actual buildings and the blondes and the brunettes and the redheads in the movie, right? So that's the difference between meta narrative versus. I'm just using the matrix analogy again, where Cipher has that. Do you always look at it encoded kind of thing? So there's a view that's encoded, there's a view that's not encoded. So meta narrative would be the non-encoded, but too complicated to understand.
We can also point to, I think, another parallel between this and the last chart in that, like, narrative, I think we would see one of those, like the elements, like narrative, as well as um, cosmos. We could assign, I think we talked about this, but I don't know if we actually settled on, is it like triadic, those sections, like the elements? Do they basically map up to temperament?
The elements of temperaments?
Yeah.
They do, but I don't think that's really relevant right now.
But we could point to parts of this chart and parts of the previous one potentially, I think. Can you go back to that other chart,
Which one?
the one that we were just on before,
Okay,
the chart?
so um, the I think the more useful chart to go from from the perspective of I think the Neural OS charts is better simply because this is just the APS,
Hmm.
right? Like there's nothing here except so this is how like this is how there's the relation. I'm trying to figure out how to word this properly. So there's the memeplex, right? And it has the two shapes, archetype slash proximity complex.
Right.
That's the bridging, and these primordial archetypes are the bridging, so to speak, elements of the APS of like how they're expressed in there. So an archetype wouldn't is in the memeplex sense is content vacant, but its content is also driving its structure. So it doesn't see itself in terms of its content, but just that structure.
Hmm.
This is the other way around, right? It sees itself in terms of its content, not its structure. So the structure is being archetype. And so we're saying this is like a primordial archetype. So that's what's injected into, that's the primordial quote unquote shape that's injected to the APS to work with, right? But it's responsible for supplying like the imagery and what when the borders are between what's this, what's that, what's the other thing, and that gives and that gives us the types and the rest of the shebang, right? So that's the connection being made.
Hmm.
And so this is like the playground. These archetypes are acting as the playground, the primordial playground, if you say, if you will. They're not meant to be like, oh yes, I'm experiencing animal right now. You know, like that's not what's happening. It's a concert of like a whole bunch of inputs, you know, playing together in a concerted effort to get to bring about a state. Right, so the state is where this is where the metaphor, not the metaphor, but the connotation makes more is made more explicit. It's the state of things, right? And so the entire picture, if you will, of what a corp is, of what fiat is, of what machine is determined through the state. And the state is the high level, is the most abstract language, if you will, of what we're looking at, right? That'll be like your peak under the mountain in the subject sense. It'll be like your peak of the mountain in your space where you're floating.
Right.
So yeah, that covers what your potentiality is. I don't know if we need to cover the actual archetypes individually because I didn't really want to focus on that. I wanted to just make them known and then move on to relating them as to how that interaction would actually materialize into something more specific to this diagram. Like, how does cosmos become space and narrative and all of that, and how does that give us a spectacle? And all of that transformations that go on between primordial archetypes into conventional archetypes that become representatives of people and places and things, and
Right.
and how those things get strung together further on. Okay,
Right. And
so
that's kind of like switching modes too, right? That
that's exactly what that is.
way.
So the mode that we had with this picture would have been called the narrative mode. And we're still going back to the spectacle, but we're going to represent the abstract face space within the spectacle. And so all of that is actually picked up all the way from the mimetic in terms of archetypes and bubbles up through types and bubbles up through the actual objects to identify them with, which we'll get into with the conventional archetypes.
Right.
Let's see. And this gives us the flower power. Oh, no, we still need this one. Cars. we're here. Right? So to pick up from the archetype diagram, the 12 that we saw, called primordial archetypes, as they are here, is actually captured by this single undifferentiated bubble in the middle. Right? So that's kind of like the other part to what I want to sort of draw attention to is that the edge of this bubble does not actually touch the outside world. So
Right.
as a thing, it doesn't actually manifest itself in terms of that, in terms of like these really weird terminologies. This is where we get into your personal archetypes. As you can see, the next layer up, there's like
Right.
this
The
small,
process of commodification is
yeah,
going outward.
right, exactly. So this is like the different people that you would have. So the different people archetypes, the collection of people themselves, sort of playing roles and different kind of identities, as the context requires, right? Like, and all of these will be like a small a reflection back of some kind of archetype within the primordial set. So this is like your identity, your role, your skill.
Right. And so these actually we could label each one of these circles, right?
Yeah, they would be labeled. I left them at just being their 12 because what what you'll probably notice is that even though they're differentiated in the picture, they still have the same quality of being undifferentiated as in the middle. Right. So
Right.
the point there being is that um, you
Well, this is the holonic property.
yeah, your language changes,
But you
but
still reflect the whole.
yeah, but the very reflections remain the same. There's nothing actually like different about the actual potentiality itself. And so it's like, yeah, we're both humans, but you're Brian and I'm Jenna. Okay, like yeah, there's some arbitrary differentiation going on. It's just it's not enough to assert that you and I are not of the same thing.
So just to make clear that the boxes from the previous table would be filled into these circles. Is that
Uh,
right?
Other way around. So if you were to make a box from the previous table, you'd have to take these circles, slap them on together in some weird manifesting combination, just bringing archetypes together to build a memeplex.
Okay, so it just happens to be that there are exactly the same amount of circles as there are boxes on the previous chart.
The 12 to 12.
12 times 3, 12, 12, 12.
That's specifically to indicate that these boxes are these circles.
That's what I said.
Okay,
So can you
sorry.
take the label though and put
No, I don't want to do that because you don't want to give it the picture that it's going to be a one-to-one thing.
oh,
So while this process is happening outwards, right? Like what lands where and how isn't so clear cut, right? And the reason being is because it's context dependent, right? Like if look at the especially if you start to take it through the different modes, right? Which is where you get the three different modes is where you get the three different layers in the first place, right? Of the archetypes. I don't think I connected that sentence very well with anything else, but so in the spectacular mode, we are there's three modes of operation, and then this is what the three outward circles are
yeah,
representing
no, I
there.
connected it. It's been that way for a while, I think.
Yeah, and so there's another thing going on. There's like a focus base going on where you move from different plateaus of commodification, and that just changes your whole language around. And this is where you get like, the next phase is actually to jump all the way to the outer circle, if you've noticed that. So there's just two layers, kind of. You see that? Each inner circle goes all the way out first.
Yeah, sorry, I was busy for a sec.
Yep.
Goes to the outer first, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the state, right? That's where you get that commodification. And so the discussion about institutions, for example, today with Paul and Paulo, is actually about this part of it that's sort of not represented within the diagram. It's the missing link of the diagram. It's talking about a phase in which these three layers are not actually differentiated, and so so this is where you get the kind of mythologies, if you will, sustaining that structure. And if it does it well, then the tribe sort of survives as a group of individuals, right? So the outer circle being the group, the inner circle being the individuals comprising the structure. At some point, you're going to have an undifferentiated way of going about it until you hit enough delay in terms of commodification. Like, but what I mean by that is until you have delays from consequences. So which allow for experimentation, I would say that doesn't necessarily lead to re-strengthening the organism, the system itself that's involved, but sort of causes it to go to more chaotic states. So
Right.
So there's that, and then once the delay is introduced, and of course this is a bit speculative, but we were talking about how alcohol might have been one of the catalysts behind that. Strictly speaking, of the growing an insane amount of crop just to get a cheap high kind of thing. Sounds like a lucrative business adventure, regardless of regardless of what millennia we're in. Just to make a story short, as this keeps going on and removed from consequences of itself, you can start to sort of like substitute here and there different bits and pieces of the picture without really having the whole thing collapse on you all at once. So this is the commodification process. Just think like just changing like the ingredients to save some money, things like that.
Just offloading from the individual.
Right, and then and so once that gets into enough of a into enough of a feedback loop, it's going to have to create another one of its another full-blown institution to just manage the mess. And this is where you get the layer in between them called the corporation. And so the corporation is the realization of this management layer in between the state, the individual, and the state, the person and the state. And so that's the final phase. It's the last phase, the actual commodified, this full-blown stack. The problem, not the problem, but what it allows to happen is because it's in the individual. It could be reframed on its own terms and basically it could be used to manage everything but what's supposed to be managed.
Right.
And so that's
Yeah,
that.
breakaway civilization.
Exactly. And
Phenomenon.
so that's kind of like the big overview of what this diagram is supposed to describe and show. The phases so that the APS goes through, and the mode, the cosmological mode that makes up the narrative mode too that we discussed earlier, is coming from sort of these dynamics over here. obviously these dynamics don't talk about any kind of specific objects of
Hmm.
interest. This is more about what it would do to any object whatsoever, and that part of the relationship is being fed into it more through other stuff that we'll be getting into. So this is just like, here I'm going to make you here's all the objects you gave me, here's a cosmos I'm going to give you back, which is going to make all the objects do their thing. This is so it's part of that building loop. Everything is always getting built in the schema. So yeah. So is there anything else I kind of missed, or
Hmm.
because there's the plateaus of commodification, and these are basically what solidifies the structure to be more and more broken.
Right, and this is the
Um,
cosmos changing over time.
yeah, like the language of the cosmos. So what commodities are available to you? So in the spatial takeover, we are discussing taking the environment and transforming it into land, right? So language changes on that front. Um, if you have decay and unity, that basically means you're sort of decaying into an empire, in that you're removing variances, right? An empire will consolidate on rules and regulations and stuff like that, and so it's a
Hmm.
unity, like in the sense that the empire is unifying, but and so
Right.
that's the arrow is pointing outwards into the that. But as you can see, the that is far more broken up from itself than the previous phase, and so that's kind of what that's pointing at. um, and then you get consolidation of difference. Where's that?
You're pointing that as the second stage.
Oh, sorry. The consolidation of difference would be the second. What I just described would
Yeah.
be the third.
Right.
Consolidation of difference is more of like your uniqueness is starting to disappear on a more personal level. So like, you know how like in these
Well,
examples in the examples that we have of some of the tribes that we
we
have.
have the economy starts coming up, right?
Yeah. So right, it circumvents the conversation, if you will. So what I mean is, we have examples of these tribes where the attitude is basically like, we won't like even really teach our children much unless they can't like figure it out or something like that, and then it's like they go through life figuring everything out for themselves, and then that's
Yeah.
that approach. So we're talking about that being transformed into, no, this is the way, this is like just like you were saying, the economy, therefore
Yeah.
we got to sort of break everybody into this mold. And so this is where you get your consolidation of all the differences. At this stage, however, you don't get necessarily like a decay of the person or anything like that, because like it's easy to jump contexts. I'm a warrior, I'm a
Right.
parent, I'm a gatherer, and I'm a shaman all at once. So in this phase, it's still the mythology that comes with it could potentially be a remedy. It could have the remedying effect that we were talking about the natural mimetic stuff. So this is where that line is drawn. Past that line is where you start to need an artificial injection, if you will, a conceptual one to intervene. Um, much like much like the corporation is injected to intervene between the two layers, this is an injection of a specific corporation to intervene on behalf of all the other corporations, so to speak, right? So that's sort of where it's a game
Right.
changer and where its relationship is actually
Yeah.
relevant.
You have certification bodies and all this.
Yeah, like otherwise, this entire thing would simply reject it, right? Outright. It doesn't fit. It wouldn't fit with any of the commodifications due to efficiency purposes. and because of disconnections, like now that they're disconnected, things can be displaced and rearranged in terms of the economy rather than in terms of the structure that it's about.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you have your temporal tampering, which is the intrusion on your time and what your thoughts are supposed to be about. And finally, tunneled reality is kind of like where your where your reality, not just not just like it's like the difference between being belonging to a certain sect of a religion, like being a Christian or being a Jew, being a Buddhist or whatever, like identifying with that. That's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like what temporal tampering does. But tunneled reality is basically, it's not just that, but we will also make sure that you get a notification so that your time is occupied with this thought only, and we're going to string it for you into a nice little string of a narrative, uh,
Right.
which is tunneled for you.
Yeah.
So
Basically, like
in
public relations, computational propaganda.
yeah, in each phase, it's another phase of commodification where things are removed from nature, from your natural life into and replaced with their product variant, and the product variant is more about the brand rather than the actual device, the actual object itself,
Right. Yeah, the
right?
breakaway,
And
as
because
usual.
and so you can replace the object behind the brand and keep the pretense
Mm-hmm.
of the full picture. And so this is where you get this is the commodification effect that we're talking about, in case it wasn't made clear before.
Right. So this chart is more of this is more related to chronology, right?
That part, the plateaus would be.
At least that part.
They're also related to guild dynamics in the sense that guild dynamics works from the plateaus as well.
Mm,
So that's like the main um, platforms for it to spring off of.
right.
So
Um, yeah, it just seemed interesting that the last chart that we had um, for the archetypes. Um, hmm,
can
just
you
trying
hold
to
that
see how
thought for a
this all.
second? I'll be
Yeah. What?
right back. I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Sure.
like 2 seconds.
Hmm.
I am back.
Cool.
All right. So you were saying,
Yeah, I'm just trying to put this in context, like it makes sense to me that the plateaus of commodification, we are through chronology kind of planting this model in like kind of a logical, rational history, um, to show how does our model or our understanding come to be. And it's through these platforms that kind of solidify as like a plateau, um, which enables the next plateau to start developing. And it's
Right.
kind of like the same thing you see in like in nature with maybe tissues forming out of cells. At some point, just a tissue emerges, cells come together.
Right, like where you get the whole slime ball becoming, you know,
Hmm.
like something more solid.
Yeah, yeah. I
Shitty
think.
analogy, but it, at least it illustrates the point.
Hmm. Yeah. So, and then the archetype stacks that we were looking at the other chart, those kind of take on, I guess, a different flavor through each plateau.
Right. So the way to understand them is that they kind of always do exist, regardless of which plateau you're on.
Hmm.
Right. It's more about like how are they expressed, and so this is kind of where I wanted to. This is the entire idea behind the institution that I keep hammering on today. Not in this chart, obviously, but in thinking, because the institute, if you will, if you were to take one of these, let's look at them as a spoke, right? If you were to look at like a three
Yeah.
circle spoke like that, if you were to take them and bind them together into one amorphous blob and draw the diagram that way, right? That'll be the diagram of the institutions that I was talking about, right? So there's no middle layer. That's the first thing to note, right? And it would basically be like the relationship between the personal archetype and the state archetypes, still managed as a corporate archetype via the institution, right? But not differentiated as as two different things, right? So
Hmm.
it's like a different view of the same picture, in which
Or are you imagining institution as something that's bound up without a choice to the individual?
with a choice to the individual, not a choice to the state. So the state is this composition of institutions, and this now can take a couple of a gradient of forms in which the individual, the personal archetype, right, um, chooses his roles in aka chooses which institutions they're in, based on context on the one extreme. So we're talking tribe one with nature, like, I mean, ideally, this is all ideology, but ideally, like, you know, the tribe that's one with nature would be on that side of the spectrum where the institutions are they're more set in stone, but the individuals that take on the roles within them are like, today I'm this, tomorrow I'm that, you know, today I'm both of these things. Whereas on on the opposite side of the spectrum, it's all calcified. It's all like, no, you must be managed by this one. You belong here. So you get like castes and clans and
Well, like,
all of that kind of
so we have
ideas.
the justice system as an institution of which you don't choose whether you want to, well, you can choose not to obey the law, but you're going to participate in that institution if you break the law.
Right, but do concerns of justice apply to every single circumstance that you're in? Are you doing it basically like as your day job, sitting there in an office, um, processing a string of disconnected cases of judgment, or is it something that you're exercising because you came across a situation where your judgment was required and called for, and then moved on to a different situation in which you're Like we're still talking about justice, so judgment in a justice sense.
Yeah.
Or like, do I need to exercise justice when I'm cutting my tomato into soup or something or a sandwich? You know what I mean? Like it doesn't apply. And so to be
Well, you'd be surprised.
but do
The
you know what I mean? You know what I
situation.
mean? I'm trying to demonstrate the fact that your belonging to a kind of institution is more contextual. It's the same as guild dynamics, right? It's the same as when do we have a proximity guild? Well, it depends, right? What are you looking at? Like right now, this is the proximity guild that we're talking through, right? But it's going to dissolve itself in a few minutes, and not exist in that time frame.
Right.
So
Yeah.
this
I
is
don't know.
the same way, except institution kind of play a role of representing the primordial archetypes within that context of having a state of individuals, right? Now, this structure is supported by mythology, which can be circumvented, and this is where you get the calcification. If those institutions start to move towards calcifying, by that I mean solidifying as taking people and saying you are defined by this institution now. When this kind of starts happening, this is where you get jobs, right? Or being
Right.
born into labor and
I
being.
guess I just don't see how it's any different. How the institution is any different than a corporation.
It's not. It's not
Why
meant
would
to
you
be.
call it?
The terminology is meant to not call to draw attention to a difference between how they would function, but rather they are the phase of the breaking apart of the primordial archetypes as we see in this diagram. It's one of the phases of that breakup, and in that phase, it's when the three circles are not like these three separate circles, but they're like one amorphous circle, and so you would have just 12 around the middle one, just like 12 petals, and that's it. Like if they were somehow the spokes became like a long ovals, right?
Right.
Those the architect, the personal, the state, and the corporation would still be part of the structure of each oval, but it would be a far more it would be the central structure. So the institute would be the central structure of the whole thing. It's the entire representative of the state.
Hmm. And is
So
this more isomorphic or what?
more this is where isomorphism breaks. This is that phase where isomorphism can be maintained through mythology and natural remedies, or break. And
Oh, wait.
so,
So this is at an early plateau or what?
yes, it would have been.
Oh, okay.
It's
Okay.
a different view of the same of this
It's
thing.
just weird that you would call that institution when it's a like very early type of thing.
I'm calling it institution because of the connotation of the word, and because we're still in, and because we're speaking from the last plateau of the entire deal, right? So we're discussing this from the very final plateau of tunneled reality. You and I,
But we're
like
we're
our
pointing
context.
at one of the first plateaus though. The
Yeah,
second.
using language from the last plateau. That's why it looks like that, and why we have words like institution, even though nobody had institutions back then. An institution would be like a band of warriors, like that would be an institution in this parlance, in what I mean by all of this. The word is just, I don't know, it sounds innocent enough to me.
I don't know about that.
Well,
Well, we can work on it.
yeah, like at least get the idea. If you have a better suggestion, if anybody has a better suggestion, absolutely, let's work through that.
Hmm.
We're always looking for words that would not trigger the modern scientific minded businessman. So they like their institutions. Just keep that in mind.
Right.
So yeah, I think that
All
about
right.
covers it.
Fair
So
enough.
that phase is important simply because it points to how the breakup happens, where solidification is happening. right, of where the calcification is happening. That's the phase. And and it's not like mapped cleanly, like onto one of the plateaus or onto one of this different commodification, onto one of the different conventional archetype phases. It happens all the time throughout all those phases, right? Like it sometimes backtracks, it sometimes yeah.
And
I wouldn't get too caught up into in trying to look at it linearly. It's something that happens in parallel, so it's kind of very difficult to try to grasp it in a single string of events.
cool.
What else can I say about this, if anything? Like, if that's clear enough, I think we can conclude this presentation here. Um,
Cool. You got to go soon, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah, might as
There's
well.
there's all the there's all those natural concerns
Mm-hmm.
leading to my areas of concerns. Do you have any
Alrighty.
questions? Like, do you want to go over like maybe any kind of tiny detail while I'm sort of wrapping this up?
No, just so where we want to go with this is kind of like the office protocol and all that. Like
Oh,
what to
yes.
do with the archetype stack.
Okay, maybe I should actually touch on that a little bit. Bam. Did you see this yet?
Mm-hmm.
All of it?
Yeah, it's very familiar.
This is just, I finally digitalized the cards that we
Right.
had in the photographs.
Yeah, so like office protocol is the like a set of instructions or what we would use to
So,
instantiate an organization.
do you see the highlighting?
Yeah,
Okay. So this would be it. Like, this is the office protocol that we have.
right. And this
Um,
is where rubber hits the road as well, as far as what are we doing with Portal Mountain? Like this is kind of a major one. And we
right.
can use this to manage Portal Mountain itself. But
Uh,
this is
that's its
about as,
purpose.
yeah,
This is actually the structure of the corporation archetype itself. That's what
yeah,
we're looking at right here. And incidentally, its main purpose is to build be used to build a corporation from it.
right. And this is about as grounded or as grounding as you could possibly be without actually being there yet, because we're still talking about it.
Yeah.
But like literally the wheels are spinning and the car is dropping.
Right. So this is towards that. We have a few elements. Like obviously, this is still a work in progress, but there's a few elements here that are kind of pointing in that direction. So what I have highlighted here is actually the same stack that we've been looking at the entire time, the archetype stack. However,
Yeah,
this is the difference. Here we have a bunch of officers sort of taking that kind of concept
the
and
roles.
the roles and
Yeah.
looking at the potential of everything in terms of, like how is that going to be managed as a business, as a corporate entity, and
Yeah.
what does that look like? And the officers, of course, the executive officers will be the sort of head points on each to touch base on each one of these things. However, if we step back over here, we have this same set of archetypes again, which is actually the entire corporation's concerns reframed. It's the archetypes reframed in terms of a corporation's concerns and structure.
Hmm.
And so those same officers are relegated actually to just a single slot in this archetype stack, which is
Right.
another parallel of it.
Yeah.
Above which we have the board of directors, for instance, which are here, which are actually
Just
a
right above that.
yeah, they're no, I know that. I mean, they're a reframing of. Sorry, you're right.
But
They're a reframing of the elemental archetypes where you have consolidation, decay, space, and time. So
right.
the board of directors are taking all of these mechanics of potentiality as their primary is their primary sort of direction through which lens through which to work, and what does that look like in actually in actual governance of a company.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we then have the entire scope of operation, i.e., what the company is doing, which is the maintenance of the dashboard, which is a piece of software, B, your cards game,
Mm-hmm.
C, whatever presents this entire presentation itself. It's all of those things, and the
The
company could be,
presentation within the neural OS.
yeah. So the company could be any one of and any single corporate entity that literally does any one of those things in this way.
Right.
It would all. That's the whole point of this document, is to demonstrate how to do that and how to bring it to life. The social responsibility we have afterwards, after human resources, is of course a division of labor within a company. Got some artifacts here to fix, but it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most. It's a meta template, if you will. It doesn't go into too many details. We don't know what we're researching. We don't know what we're developing. We don't know what we're operating, and we certainly don't know what we're coordinating in any specific corporation. Like, this document doesn't tell you that. But
Right.
once everything is established and bootstrapped and whatever, these are like the basic divisions by which you wanna prioritize by, and then of course you will have something internal to those, which we haven't really discussed yet. So I don't have
Mm-hmm.
too much commentary on it. Social responsibility being basically the mission statement, if you will, of the company itself, its purpose, and it's always the same. If you want to be isomorphic here, if we want to
Right.
re-represent the structure, it's always going to be this. It's always going to come back to the scope of operations, which is, and the social responsibility, all of which are essentially concerned with self-replication, if you will, of this system, of perpetuating this information, one way, another way, and a third way,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of living, in terms of thinking, in terms of doing, in terms of speaking. You pick it, it's supposed to touch that somehow.
Right.
Um, so we have our government, our office, and departments, um, which is again a threefold division of archetype, models, and guild.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, like I was saying earlier, there's some stuff to complete here still. We're definitely not all the way through this idea, but it's been shaping up for a couple of years now. So
Yep. And just to quickly kind of ground this, so on the right side, the chief officers, like if we look at chief real estate officer, when you are forming an organization or coming together, or even during the process in normal operations, you have some people are going to have to be concerned with the facilities. Where are people going to be sitting? Where are they going to meet? Where is the shop happening? These kind of concerns are we can see in a corporate context as well as a personal. Like the human being themselves has to live in a house, right? They want shelter. They need maybe a car, a house. So these are just kind of like, this is just a concrete example of um, how the primordial archetypes have to be satisfied within an organizational structure in order for something to happen. Because if you don't have space time, you've got literally nothing happening nowhere.
exactly. Exactly. And if you don't have materials, you don't have anything. And if you don't have a way to put the materials together, you don't have anything. And if
Mm-hmm.
you don't have a way to think about how to put the materials together and pre-plan it, and
Yep.
have a timeline to do it in, again, you don't have anything.
Yep.
So again, it's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
or nothing. It's an all or nothing game, out of which the state archetype is really the cusp, the tip of that iceberg. And I want to stress again, state as in the state of things makes a lot more sense for this discussion, as in terms of like how do you approach this how do you approach this subject. However, the word state as in a sovereign state is also acceptable because it also is a state of
Yeah,
things.
like a
So,
subset of that. Yeah.
so those both of the definitions will work. It's just you got to keep in mind as to where you would use one versus the other and why.
hmm
These are not separate subjects, but they are certainly not meant to be too conflated either.
Cool. So I think that's good for now. We can maybe start thinking about for maybe tomorrow do another meeting, and maybe we can get into deck protocol. I don't know if we've covered office protocol sufficiently here. Um,
We could certainly do that. So we've covered a lot of the mechanics, and so we were at the point of actually making a corporation. So therefore, starting over products would be the next logical step, I
mhm,
think.
for sure, yeah. And this is specifically kind of within this would be developing the dashboard and related
Yeah,
technology.
the dashboard is like the name for the ultimate product, if you will. It
Right.
takes many forms. Um,
hmm
Caveat there, this quickly turned into corporate speak after model speak, right? So I want to make sure that this kind of has been always the trajectory. So this isn't something new that we're doing. Um, the corporation here and all of this stuff about the corporation being a corporation and sort of tackling it on a more concrete sense as a business has actually
hmm
been part and parcel of the language
Yep.
that we've been using,
Yeah.
and part of the reason why the computerized language is used and why we're so averse to what other people call as woo, is because it has a kind of a tendency of throwing a wrench into the proverbial bike wheel of the businessman mind,
hmm
where they're risk
Yeah.
averse, and they are very much time constrained. They're very much response oriented. This is again ideally.
Right.
We're
Yeah, and
not
this
we're not we're
it's
not
been a
describing it.
goal. It's been a goal for quite some time, for well, years. I know our work with Anders was about how to make an organization, right?
Yeah,
Like how to actually put people together and work together and make stuff happen. And so this kind of technology ideally would quote unquote infect mimetically with as a medicine
yeah,
to heal the structures of existing corporations even. Anybody who takes up this type of structure is going to end up with a correct stance towards social responsibility.
exactly. It's from small steps to large steps, right? Like you can be a corporation that does something that does something its own way, or does something of its own idea, but by following these steps, not shitting on the environment at the same time.
hmm
Stuff like that are all potentialities for the structure. So it's meant as the meta corporation structure, for sure, and a concrete corporation with a concrete product and the dashboard software, the card game, the AO software, um, whatever Scepter was supposed to be and never will be. Like all of these projects are really under the umbrella of this organization. Um, Regardless of whether it goes by that name legally or not,
hmm
it's under that umbrella.
Right. hmm Yeah, because we've outmetted them.
Apparently,
Well, or not outmetted, but or at least met certain meta standards.
yeah. The context of the organism and an environment. That's really about context and always will be. Uh, yeah, I don't know what else to add, so I think I'll end it there.
Cool. Yeah, that's good.
All right.
Very nice.
Cheers.
Good
It was
talk.
a pleasure to ramble on and on and on and on.
hmm Yep, I'll post the recording and transcribe.
Awesome. Thanks.
Cool. Cheers.